Hello, Carlos.
Hey, hey. How's it going?
Excellent. Waiting perhaps for one more.
Sweet.
There we go.
Hi, folks.
Evening
Hey.
/ afternoon. So it sounds like we have a couple items on the agenda today.
Yeah, I think we'll start focus on the roadmap to general availabilities. I think Open Elementary, they have a documentation that set us to be general available next Q2 next year, I think.
Okay.
I have to find that somewhere. I'm not sure if that's, would be a reasonable timeline for us.
Yeah, seems like it could be worth maybe reviewing the sort of outstanding pieces. It does appear to be mostly feature complete from a tracing side. So I think the items on the agenda are sort of accurate in that potentially there could be more tests. We could sort of assess things for viability. The API checklist for just making sure this is a well-formed Rust project generally. Does it conform to all the idioms, those type of things? I think doing the survey, doing all those types of things would be good. And then, yeah, getting sort of to, through the last kind of tracking issue there for the long tail. One of the bigger pieces that I would think, so originally we had a similar model to the Go implementation on sort of a pipeline builder. Go walked that back before they did GA to not need clarity on the best way of making a few specifics. I think it was about resources and a few others that were sort of tricky to get in with the builder syntax. So potentially we could do that as well and just roll back the sort of builder implementation and go to a lower level sort of raw construction of exporters and tracer providers as well. It may be an easier commitment to make if we want to get something that we can call stable and then sort of release higher level, maybe cleaner constructors on top of that. Not sure how sort of everyone feels about that, or Carlos, if the core team has sort of more guidance, or if there's a general sort of OTel stance. I know the constructors across languages vary a little bit, but they do sort of tend to be a little more verbose. Sort of if there's sort of a consensus generally among ways of making that more sort of to lower the boilerplate perhaps for configuration, or if it's just a thing that we shouldn't be attempting yet and should just standardize first around something that may be a little more verbose, and then sort of have the nicer, maybe cleaner UIs later if sort of patterns emerge that people find useful.
Is that for configuration in general?
Yeah, for the construction. So right now there's sort of often two separate ones. So I mean, the Go, for example, went from one sort of pipeline builder kind of struct pattern to sort of minimally two, one for sort of configuring the exporter and then one for configuring the tracer provider, and then often explicitly setting the tracer provider as the global default. There's sort of a few steps in properly constructing an OTel environment generally, right? And there's sort of a few ways that could go wrong. Like if you think that just creating one will, for instance, register it as the global, and you sort of forget to, you may sort of create a instance of your application that doesn't actually end up tracking anything. things like that. There's sort of there's more foot guns in the more verbose, sort of fully defined manual structure rather than something that would be a little more declarative, but is there's sort of less consensus upon, as far as I can see, in the OTel side generally on sort of tracing instantiation.
Yeah, that's correct. I think that at least I have seen that many SIGs, they try to keep this minimalistic if possible, just to avoid problems. Usually they have been adding stuff like for a more advanced, more granular configuration after 1.0. So yeah, I would say anything that you are not sure, especially at configuration time, it's totally fine to leave it out for the first version.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that, or is that sort of the is the recommendation effectively that we should sort of roll back any non sort of strictly necessary features that currently exist in order to get sort of to a faster, stable 1.0?
Well, I would say that's up to you, how you feel. I know that, for example, some languages like Python, they were taking more risks. But other languages like Go, they were more conservative, I would say, in comparison. Yeah, so it's up to you in general. I mean, there's some effort that still needs to happen when it comes to configuration, but that's mostly when it comes, well, there are two things, and probably they are not entirely related to what you are talking about, because they are related only. One of them is how to provide a high-level API to configure things. So it means that in any case, for final users, we will be offering at some point in the future a very easy abstraction to provide that. The second thing is to provide environment or external configuration through environment variables or configuration files. So those things exist, I would say, in parallel. And in theory, those two things will help configuring, OpenTelemetry. Because of that, I would say that you have less responsibility on your side. There will be other things that will be taking care of that. Because of that, I would say, as I said before, I think that if there's something that you are not confident about, it's totally, absolutely fine to leave that out.
Yeah, so that may be something that we sort of try to assess then internally. It's sort of the confidence in the current builder model for configuration. There are some others, the compiled languages obviously have a trickier time in kind of dynamic construction of some of these things, especially as packages have to sort of be statically imported, and some other bits that make sort of full configuration through environment variables somewhat trickier in some languages than others. But yeah, no, I think as long as the spec generally is adhered to, that probably is fine. I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, if you want some actual further, more technical review on that, more detailed review, maybe you can create an issue for this specific point and what things you would like to maybe keep out and what things to keep in. And then I can review the actual issue with the technical details. Yeah, in case you want more explicit technical feedback.
Yeah, I think perhaps some of them could be useful. Are there folks on the technical committee or other people who are more comfortable with Rust?
So I think that nobody is an expert there. Yeah.
That's sort of the state of the world. It's, the newer languages often will run into just some more of that. But yeah, from sort of an ergonomic side, that would be one where obviously it's nicer to have different sized organizations input on it as well. If there's certain concerns that are useful, it's nice to know that before you commit to a stable 1.0.
Well, I mean, we can still do a review when it comes to the API in general. What things we think, like, for example, when I did something in Python, I remember that they were adding a lot of sugar methods there. And I, for example, I suggested just remove that, and it's on you. So it's like very general stuff that we can provide. The other thing is that for some specific stuff, and this is not specific to the SIGs, is that, for example, like the current sampling, the probabilistic sampling effort, a lot of people in hotel, they are not familiar with any of these brand new stuff that is happening there. And so basically there's a separate group of external experts that they are providing feedback. So basically people in the auto community, they just go review that. They give a very general feedback piece, and then we count on the experts. I think that for Go, that was actually some idea that we had in the past, because Yana, I forgot her family name, but Yana, who was around in the past, she was very, very involved in Golang. So even though she was not part of the core hotel community, we wanted to get feedback from her, and it would be totally valid, you know, it's just to so if you know somebody that knows Rust more, that person, if that's, you know, you can say this person is an expert, and even though he's not part of the auto community, he's giving his blessing. That could be a good thing if you feel that this is the way to go.
Yeah, we could perhaps look into those. Let's see, what was the other issue that was linked here? Oh yeah, issue 364. There is sort of wait, is that right? Maybe the other issue for the tracking issue 1.0. There were sort of a couple smaller issues. I think just auditing sort of the interfaces generally to make sure that these were the types of things we want to support. But I think in general, most of the tracing feature set, I mean, as you can see on the feature matrix, most of the things are implemented. So the sort of the overall capabilities are all there for 1.0. I think it is really the final touches, which are sort of trickier, right? It's sort of understanding if there are more either performance sensitive or other optimizations that could be done at this point to make APIs more ergonomic or that type of thing before they're sort of locked down. And yeah, you know, maybe that is the type of thing we're going through, and just sort of identifying those and requesting specific audits could be the most sort of the quickest path forward for some of those, or the easiest way to get feedback, rather than just sort of the blank slate of asking people, is this good or not type of broad questions. Yeah, maybe there could be some attention there for breaking out more of the specifics on where we sort of want to make sure the interfaces are correct and sort of ready to be committed to for a longer term. Yeah, so I think that would probably make sense as sort of you know, to-do items from this meeting, is to sort of break out some of those issues maybe in more detail. Were there other sort of bits of feedback too? I know it's been a little bit since we sort of talked to maybe some of the technical committee more directly. Were there other bits of context that should be sort of at the SIG level, or things we should be taking into account when working on the language specific implementations?
Not really. I think that in general, the doubts, or not the doubts, but the curiosity from the TC was mostly what's the state in general. And I could say more specifically about timelines. We didn't know, like, I know that, for example, Ruby was coming and going, and then some effort actually happened there. So we were wondering what's the state, and I don't know whether you have timelines and how confident you feel about them, if you have any. That would be mostly the thing. And as I said before, I was talking in the Slack channel that we are happy to do a TC review whenever you're free, whenever you're ready, sorry. But yeah, we were initially curious about the timelines.
Yeah, it seemed like the mention at the beginning of this meeting of you know, Q1 2022 seems sort of the right sort
Makes
of general
sense.
gist. Basically, and the other side can follow. Some updates need to be done. There was sort of an implementation of the metric side as well that while feature complete was more along the lines of the original Go implementation rather than sort of some of the bits that have changed since then. But at least from the tracing side, I think that probably is reasonable. It just needs sort of a few last passes before we can sign
Nice.
off that this is the right feature set to go with.
But that would that be tracing API and SDK as well, like both
Correct.
components? Perfect.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, the API is more stable. I think there are some questions, like there's the open issue 658 on if things like there's sort of the ability to say force flush spans, and if that's kind of part of the API or the SDK. It's currently sort of
Right.
defined more at the SDK level, it seems, within the actual spec document. But in order to have that work across implementations, or within sort of the current implementation of the global constructor, it almost exists more at the API level in Rust. So there's some small questions like that on kind of package specifics, or where some functionality should live, and if it makes sense, or if it's kind of SDK specific.
Right. Actually, I would be very happy, honestly, to take all these small doubts on stuff like this, let the separation between API and SDK. I would be very happy to read about them in issues, because I know that for Python, that was also a problem. Like before the release, these had the same problem. Some things that were expected to be on the API, they were on the SDK, and the other way around. And it was not so obvious, because the specification sometimes is suddenly not as clear as it should be. So in anything that you guys think that is not clear, I'm really happy to go to an issue that you create and go over that even before the actual TC review. By the way, the TC review is optional, but so it's up to you. But in case you are even before that, any doubt, I will be very happy to go over that. Because yes, I think that, as I said before, that the difference is not clear as it should be sometimes.
Okay, great. Yeah, maybe we'll sort of take a pass at those types of issues and find the areas that are. I think there's probably only one or two of those currently, but ping you on some of those where it's perhaps a little ambiguous, and we can try to find the right resolution to those type of proper module definitions. Great. Yeah. Were there other? Go ahead.
We also have a question whether, like, since the Rust doesn't really support the optional parameters, we also have to figure out a way to allow to adding more, configuration to the existing API, which currently doesn't have a good way to do it. For example, the tracer was used to only have two required parameters. One is name, one is the other instrument library, and after that, the specification add something called schema, and we were having a hard time to adjust that. Because like our tracer function is just one function, it takes exactly two parameters, and if we want to add another one, can become tricky. It's just we can of course change the API at this moment, but if we want to go stable, it won't be an option. So I think we need to figure out how we want to do it for that situation.
Right.
So I mean, in that case, the builder mode actually makes sense, because you can have the ability to add more functionality to it.
Yes. Yeah, this is kind of the reason why builders are so popular in Java, because this allows more flexibility. And it may be ugly, or it may consume more memory, but it gives you some more flexibility.
Yeah. So we may need to. That may be one where we sort of have sort of an ergonomics review, or sort of other questions. I think there are ones where it becomes. Yeah, I think that the point that you're bringing up is a really good one, where if there is one constant parameter that is passed and one optional parameter that is sort of reasonable, even sort of idiomatic Rust to have sort of a method with that signature. To have a method with two optional parameters starts to become a little long in the tooth for a lot of idiomatic Rust. So yeah, maybe we can sort of look through which methods make sense to break out into ones that are maybe have sort of a simpler form. Like if you only have if you're just trying to get a tracer with just a name, and you don't have a schema or or you're just using the default instrumentation library, maybe that is sort of simpler one, and then we have another that's a builder, or we could sort of decide on some other basic pattern to use there. But it would make sense to have sort of a usability or just sort of a developer experience review on some of those to make sure that the ergonomics of the APIs that we're exposing are sort of reasonable to commit to.
Yep. And also, I agree that we shouldn't worry about the high-level configuration thing, because I think a lot of users are using the libraries through the Rust tracing ecosystem, which means their user interface is actually landed in the tracing side, and we just provide the underlying functionality from the tracing part.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Rust has the added perhaps benefit, but also complication of there being other very interoperable tracing ecosystems that this sort of slots into, which means there's some ability to experiment within those other interfaces and sort of punt on making that decision here. Like we could effectively ship 1.0 and other libraries can provide higher level abstraction for making the developer experience a clean one. So that's useful. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it would be useful if we have our own high level configuration, but if we don't have the time to do that, I think it's totally fine. We leave that to the tracing ecosystem.
Yep.
That's
good. It's a good strategy. But that would mean sort of going through and removing all of the pipeline syntax that we have right now and just reverting all the examples to use the more explicit, create an exporter and then create a tracer provider and then set the tracer provider as the global tracer provider sort of pattern of instantiation.
Is there a way we can mark some of the component inside the API SDK as unstable while other becomes stable? I mean, the builder and configuration is not part of API anyway. It's just something we build for the user.
That's a good question. Carlos, have you seen sort of ways of delineating sort of more experimental? I mean, we could have, for example, a more experimental package or sort of other ways of explicitly marking things as kind of out of the scope of stability right now. But are there sort of OTel, sort of cross OTel, maybe standard ways of doing that type of signaling?
There's a document somewhere, but basically the idea is that everything that is not stable, it has to be in a separate package or artifact or whatever it's called for different seeds.
Okay.
Yeah, I know.
I
know.
Be behind a feature in Rust. I mean, there's sort of a few ways of doing it. One would be like open telemetry experimental Rust crate. Literally, one might be just using a cargo flag to basically let users opt into the more unstable API, or just putting it in a module marked experimental or something, so they have to have it in their import path, to sort of signaling that they're opting into instability. So a few potential paths.
Yeah, the first case that you mentioned, it was mentioned that it happened to be like that in Scala. Like it's released in the actual stable package, but with some labels saying, this is experimental. But the problem is that people started relying on that. So even though it's experimental, it's in the final package. So they, and it's coming out of the box, so they don't know. And then later they will be complaining that you're breaking their code base when it's compiling. So that's the risky part. And that's why, for example, in Java, we also wanted to have some experimental annotation, but it was deemed too risky. So sadly, it's like putting a lot of stuff in their own package. So users have to be super explicit that they are importing Rust, specific Rust experimental, whatever, Yeah, I know that it's more work, so I don't know. I would say it depends how much work, but if you can go the second path, that would be so much better.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think minimally sort of having a flag that actually requires opting in rather than just an import path. Like the import path is easily missed by IDEs sort of auto importing and other things. But a flag that when you import the package, you explicitly have to choose that you're opting into the unstable set, maybe a happy middle ground there.
Yep. Yeah. That sounds like a good approach.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. So we can sort of start moving things that we're not that are sort of in tracing the module currently, but not sort of being committed to behind those types of flags. Yeah, I think that those are probably a couple sort of takeaways from this that'll be useful.
We should probably start working on the integration test between collector and the tracing API SDK, things like that. I think we have pretty good coverage in tracing side in terms of unit testing. Integration testing, not so much. And there's also Jaeger exporter, which would be nice to release at the same time.
Yeah, I guess, Carlos, is there, what does the overall ecosystem look like for 1.0s on exporters and other sort of related packages?
Could you elaborate on
like
that?
is it generally that there's a set of exporters that go 1.0 at the same time as the tracing library itself? Yeah,
totally. So basically for exporters, I need to check the link, but basically from the top of my head, you need one of the OTLP ones, either the gRPC or the HTTP one. You need the Jaeger, the Zipkin one, the memory one, and the logging one. Those could be the basic exporters. And for the processors, you only need to have a simple batching processor as a minimum thing.
Yeah, so all of those are there. I think it would be more on the stability guarantee. So if we were to have the tracing API and SDK 1.0, would the expectation be that those accompanying exporters also hit 1.0 at the same time, or are those sort of independent releases in terms of sort of stability guarantees?
That's a good one. I think that most SIGs already have all of these exporters by 1.0.
And however, the version of those exporters is also 1.0?
That's correct. Yeah, okay. I have to say that the exception to that, and this is a very recent thing, is JavaScript, that they went 1.0 without some of these ones. And the reason is that they are using OTLP JSON, which is not stable. So they went without an stable OTLP exporter. Yeah, so I don't have a clear answer for that. In theory, yes, you should have all of these ones. 1.0 as part of the final of the 1 GA release. I would say that the motivation or the rationale behind that is that the community is afraid, like, the GC at least, is afraid that if you go 1.0, then maybe you will provide one OTLP exporter and then you will not release Zipkin and a Jaeger exporter, and you will never do that because you were never,
right, it wasn't a requirement. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, well, we've sort of got those already developed, but yeah, I guess so that's a good point. Then maybe the integration testing and making sure we have coverage on those and support would be something we should check as well, so we don't break those guarantees once we've released them.
Okay. One other thing is last time we talked about JA, we talked about our dependency status. I think most of them, at least the important ones, will become stable, but there are still one or two dependency. It's not stable. Personally, I wouldn't consider much, but just in case someone have any thoughts on that.
Are they in public interfaces? Like, are they in public methods signatures, or are they just internal sort of implementation details right now?
Yeah, we'll have to figure that out too. I don't have a list of dependency with me right now, but I can take a look and try to
Yeah, because I think that would be the bigger question. As long as we don't expose any of those, then we're not really committing to them. It would be really if any of their types end up in the public interfaces, then we have to be we can't release before they are 1.0, or they can make breaking changes and it will negatively affect us.
But we need to examine this. So.
Yes, yeah, that's a good point. That's another audit we should do. Just make sure that all the tracing interfaces either have 1.0 crate dependencies in their external interface, or it's just an implementation detail, and then it doesn't matter.
Good.
By the way, I was checking, and it's something interesting because per the specification, the Jaeger and the Zipkin exporters are not they are not optional. Well, but they have some interesting things because I forgot that, for example, Jaeger supports multiple formats, so you're obligated to support at least one in theory.
Okay.
Because they have Thrift, Protobuf, or Thrift over HTTP. So it's a funny thing there. But anyway, probably if you want, you can create an issue in the ROS repo, and I can follow up, and I will double verify what are the expectations there.
That's good.
Let's do that. So the thing is that the section for these exporters in the spec doesn't mention a must or a should. However, in the spec, in the compliance matrix, you have basically, I mentioned, you have a column, you have a section with exporters, and then you have a column with the called optional, and then you know what did you need. And then there are, of course, a lot of notes. But yeah, let's follow up on that one.
Sounds good.
Just for this, yep, let's do that.
Very cool. Yeah. So we have the zip let's see. Yeah, the Thrift and the Thrift over HTTP versions, at least for Jaeger, done. The Zipkin has one of the, I think, JSON HTTP implementation. And yeah, the OTLP is the gRPC implementation.
And we'll have a protobuf on top of HTTP implementation too.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so making sure those are there. If there are, yeah, I guess right, more around the interfaces that those use. So make sure the exporter interface is stable. I think there were some changes we wanted to make there in terms of where it's exported. There's sort of a few sort of internal ergonomics changes that we wanted to make. And I think they were in the tracking issue for 1.0. But if they're not, we can make sure that they get in there so it's all sort of easy to sort of centrally see the state of.
Yeah.
Yeah, this looks good. Okay, great. So yeah, Carlos, the metrics side is still waiting for feature freeze. Is that right? The spec status.
What section of the matrix?
The metrics.
What part specifically? In theory, I don't think, like, you mean about regarding adding items, or?
Yeah, like it sort of there's we have to do a bit of sort of rework. We had more alignment with the initial kind of working draft of the spec, but haven't done the change for kind of the latest
right,
the latest metrics changes that have come out. So but the spec is effectively locked in terms of that, so it's sort of safer from a SIG perspective to start working for that as well.
Yeah, totally. Yes. Cool. And actually, I mean, technically you have to, if you want to go GA, you only have to be compliant with the 1.0 release, which has probably a few less items in the matrix itself.
Gotcha.
So yeah, I mean, we have had 8 releases ever since with some additions. So yeah, probably that it's a silly thing because we should probably be presenting some difference, or, you know, well, I mean, you can actually go to the actual release and check what the stuff is at that release, and then you can just go with that. Cool. I know that one of the recent things that we changed, for example, is that now these days we recommend that if SIGs have to choose between supporting OTLP gRPC and OTLP HTTP, we prefer that they go with OTLP HTTP. So it's a should support this instead. But it's a relatively minor change. Yeah, because in 1.0 it's like you have to support one or the other, and now it's well,
that is sort of a preference, at least in terms of which one.
Right.
Cool.
Right.
Well, I think we support both of them, so that should be fine.
Perfect.
Cool. Great. Anything, this was useful to go through and sort of recap things and see what the state of this is. Is there any other things that we should discuss here while we have folks thinking about it?
Don't have anything on my mind.
I'm fine, and as just to mention this again, I'm happy to do this review, even if I don't know, whenever you're ready, no pressure. And as I said, this is optional. The actual full review from the TC, and even if I am not around because I will be on holidays in the future, in the near future, anybody from the TC can do that. In the meantime, happy to help with any doubt.
Perfect. Thanks. Well, that sounds great. We'll get the sort of next steps going and take it from here.
Sweet.
Wonderful. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you. Ciao.
See you.
See you.